I can kind of sense the pushback to this now, you know.
Oh, boo-hoo, look at the sensitive parrot complaining about their dinosaur. Why don't you just go sit AFK at a water source for 15 hours growing your herbivore?
Welcome to a more offensive playstyle for Parasaurolophus against aerial threats in Beast of Bermuda. So in this video, we're going to examine a more aggressive, calculated stance that a para can take against Pteranodons and Tropios, as opposed to running into a cave or having to rely on herd members to protect it. Ever since the Pteranodon aerial acrobatics update, the conventional approach of this matchup does not serve us paras too well anymore, so it's time to reconsider how we play our character in this situation. So the reality is that we're not pushovers, and we don't need to be dying to a creature that's about 2 growth tiers below us. We can deal with them, we just need to change our tactics to take a more offensive and confident approach and not fall to the expectation that we're supposed to just keel over and die to the new updated Pteranodon. I've broken down this playstyle philosophy into 3 core principles. So the first principle is location and positioning. The second principle is precision movement and flight path alignment, something I might call the beak check, and we'll get into that later. And the third principle is head alting and pre-attacking. Let's take a look at the first principle of location and positioning. In my opinion, in order to effectively fight birds as a para, contrary to the popular understanding of the matchup, is to actually seek an area that is open, elevated, and flat, such as a mountaintop or a large rock. If you can fulfill these 3 parameters, you are putting yourself in a position of always knowing where the Pteranodons are without having to rely on Z-call. You're positioning yourself in a way that forces the birds to engage more closely with your hitbox, and you're allowing them to use the maneuvers they wish to use. Now, why do we want to let them play how they want to play? So, the thing about this is when Pteranodons are forced into complicated maneuvers, like having to fight you against a hillside, those maneuvers are actually more difficult for us to respond to than if they were feeling free to just do whatever they wanted to do. So it's actually in our interest to engage them in the open because they feel less forced to do these complicated maneuvers, and we're more able to respond to what they're doing. Have a look at these 2 kind of crude pictures here. I've kind of outlined Pteranodon's flight path with a blue line, the hitbox of its piercing beak attack with the yellow circle, and the para's hitbox with the red square. So what we're looking at in these 2 pictures, it's more pronounced definitely in the one where the para's head is facing uphill, attempting to battle the Pteranodon. As we can see, conceptually, the Pteranodon's able to completely avoid the para's hitbox in terms of its attack hitbox, and I can completely avoid any damage, while a significant portion of the para's body is kind of just free damage. Nothing the para can really do about it. It's a little bit less of an issue with para facing the opposite direction, but it's still present. Para fighting on non-even ground is a situation that is unfavorable to the para, in my opinion. A lot of my engagements with Pteranodons, and as well might be your engagements with Pteranodons, when I'm on an incline, my effectiveness against them seems to just drop very obviously. Unable to hit them in a lot of situations. And so part of the idea of this new kind of offensive philosophy is to eliminate inclines when we're fighting them. Have a look at this third picture here. It shows me on top of a hill and the potential approach trajectories of the Pteranodon. I'm able to, through the use of my positioning and also the precision movement, the tapping of the keys that we talked about, to line myself up with the Pteranodon from wherever it may choose to come from. I'm able to force it through my hitboxes. Now, I may not hit it every time, but I at least have the opportunity to hit it most times. And that's a big difference from this. The second principle is precision movement and flight path alignment. In other words, what I kind of call beak check. So let's start with precision movement. So if you take a look at how a para turns, it has a wide circle and its head is moving quite a bit while moving. And the problem with this is that it's difficult sometimes in the heat of combat to understand where your hitbox actually is, where your head's going to go, etc. So with precision movement, which is tapping a turn key instead of actually holding it to turn your full body, You are moving incrementally in very small corrective movements in order to align yourself against the flight path of the Pteranodon. So in other words, where their beak is going, your beak is going. We're paras, we have beaks. So if they're diving towards you, you don't want to face towards them. You want to face in the direction they're coming, in the direction in which they're going to fly past you. You're going to catch them on the upswing with your attack. And this is very important because not a lot of people do this. You have a better chance of attacking the bird successfully if you are catching them on the upswing of their attack instead of trying to catch them on the downswing when their dive is making contact with you. The third principle is head alting and pre-attacking. So this goes into the other principles as well, but head alting is nothing new. Pretty much everyone knows about it. It's important that you do it because alting your head up allows you to hit hitboxes farther up, which of course is important because they are birds, they're high up. The important thing here is pre-attacking, and pre-attacking is possibly the most important thing to understand on any dinosaur when fighting birds. So obviously Pteranodons are a very fast dinosaur, and probably it is on its dive, it's probably the fastest thing in the game, and the server has difficulty communicating where that bird is relative to you. And what that results in is, as far as being a hittable target with a hitbox, where it's visually being represented to you is actually past information. So if you make a decision to attack based on visual input, then you are going to miss your attack. And this is so important, especially for paras. You need to pre-attack by about a quarter of a second or so in order for an attack to land a lot of the time. And you'll notice a lot of the times when you were attacking as a para, like, well, why did that hit? You know, it obviously they flew through me, it hit them. It's because the bird's not actually where it's being visually represented to you. So you can, it's a bit of an insurance policy. You pre-attack by a fraction of a second, and what it does is it ensures an active hitbox when that bird actually flies through you. Because again, visual representation of where a Pteranodon is false past information. It's already gone by, it's no longer there anymore. So you need to account for that in your attacks. What follows is a series of videos demonstrating these three principles in action, and again, those are location and positioning, precision movement and flight path alignment, in other words, a beak check, and 3, head alting and pre-attacking. So the expectation here is that through application of these principles, you should more effectively be able to fight and win engagements with Pteranodons as a Parasaurolophus. The playstyle doesn't invalidate preferring a more passive approach in hiding. Sometimes you have to do that. Sometimes the birds are too big, there's too many, you're too small, things like that. I do not advocate relying on a herd to save you. Most likely, a herd is going to end up killing you, but we'll get into that later. The goal of this video overall is to simply advance offensive theory of this matchup. So with that being said, I hope you enjoy the videos. In this video, we are utilizing precision rotation, facing the direction of the dive, remembering that our beak is facing the same direction as their beak, and pre-attacking in order to punish a low dive from a Pteranodon. Same in this clip, we use our vantage point and precision movement to line up a stomp against a diving Pteranodon, noting again that we are pre-attacking. Also realize that Stomp's hitbox reaches much farther up than you might realize. Let's take a look at a slower paced engagement against Tropios. We've been hit by a bird and we're keeping calm, scanning the sky to see what we're up against and trying to locate them. Note the camera movement here. We're in a good position, but there's foliage obstruction and I'm still trying to maximize my view of the sky to make a game plan. In both cases, I'm aligning myself with their flight trajectory, not against it. Beaks in the same direction, if you prefer that analogy, and we're pre-attacking. Visually, my attacks are not always connecting, but they are registering as hits. You should increase your hit rate by following this principle. This clip demonstrates prolonged combat with Pteranodons while heavily outnumbered. So as you can see from the start here, I'm overwhelmed and making many of the mistakes paras tend to make in this matchup and using very few of the mechanisms we've discussed up to this point. I'm having virtually no success and they're taking free hits off of me regularly. Eventually, I kind of focus up here and start orienting myself in my camera, as we've discussed, as well as pre-attacking, and we see a significant increase in my performance. Throughout this clip, I end up killing around 4 of the birds and wounding several others. This is a no-rules event occurring, so body down isn't in effect here. Were this a rule environment, I would be looking to end the engagement only with stomps, because it's important to realize that only landing basic attacks will cause the birds to rotate shifts of attacking you while the others go to heal. You'll ultimately need to land a stomp to kill one, or they'll slowly attrition your health down and you'll lose. This upcoming kill is a good demonstration of just how much vertical reach a stomp has, so be sure not to be too timid in the use of this attack, but of course make sure to manage your ability power accordingly because it is quite expensive. In a moment you'll also notice a purple Pteranodon starting to utilize some more advanced tactics against me, likely because it's seen a number of its group mates die at this point. So the Pteranodon you'll see is doing fake dives to bait out an attack, and then circling back to kind of strafe me. And you'll see here that I attempt to respond to this by employing a jump turn in a mid-air attack and managing to clip the Pteranodon on its way past me. Developing your own tactics like this while keeping the principles we've been discussing in mind will be necessary as birds begin to adapt to this fighting style. Another example of a jump turn attack in order to hit a more privy and careful Pteranodon. You'll need to become comfortable with maneuvers like this in order to hit them. An additional couple examples of a jump turn attack in response to complicated Pteranodon maneuvers. The jump turn attack's effectiveness relies on you being familiar with how your head turns in response to the camera relative to directional movement inputs, calling back to the first principle we discussed earlier. Now, just for some closing notes and kind of tips and tricks here for your consideration. So something to consider about the para Z call. It's important to understand that while you're doing this, and for a fairly long amount of time afterwards, tagging prevents attacking. You can't attack after you tag someone, and you also can't attack after you've used one of your other calls. So bear that in mind. A good Pteranodon player is going to know that. They're going to dive you as soon as they're tagged. Also important not to over-tag, but tagging is kind of interesting because when you do over tag, they have that cooldown icon on them and it kind of indicates to you where they are. So that is definitely something you can use to your advantage if they happen to be over tagged. And something important to mention too is that it's very acceptable to throw out attacks in anticipation of a dive if you can't find the bird. Most likely they're behind you somewhere and you're just not able to find them in the sky. In those situations, I will throw out some odd attacks here and there in anticipation of them arriving from behind me before I can turn around. And it can sometimes score some hits. It can throw them off a little bit. It's an important thing to kind of utilize sometimes. And lastly, this video dealt a lot with diving. And it's important to understand that diving is not the only thing Pteranodons are going to do. Once they realize that you are responding to their dives in an intelligent way, they are going to work in various different kinds of attacks, like fake diving and then circling around to swoop you from the side. It's important that you respond to that. Now, in some of the videos that we took a look at, you'll see me kind of jumping and circling and hitting them. As they're kind of spiraling around, I also spiral to kind of catch them on the upswing or as they're doing it. You do need to work in some of these maneuvers like that as the birds become aware of what you're doing in the fight. Some of them won't adapt to what you're doing and you'll just win, but the good ones will, and it is important to develop your own response to that. Now, the things we talked about I feel like are very important and should be incorporated into para play against birds in general, but again, it's not a catch-all kind of deal. You are going to need to adapt to the situation and introduce your own method of fighting as they start to kind of branch out from just predictable dives. At the end of the day here, the Pteranodon situation isn't really natural, and para shouldn't be having this kind of problem dealing with Pteranodons. I can kind of sense the pushback to this now, you know.
Oh, boo-hoo, look at the sensitive paramane complaining about their dinosaur. Why don't you just go sit AFK at a water source for 15 hours growing your herbivore?
And two things about that. First of all, I can do two things at once, and I am. And para isn't the only dinosaur that's having an issue with this. So let's look at some examples of that. So in the span of one patch, Pteranodon is suddenly now absolutely dominating its counter, the Tropio. Tropio does not win that matchup anymore. It gets absolutely destroyed. And then the Velo versus Pteranodon matchup, which before this change was actually a pretty high skill matchup. It could really go either way, and it just depended on the player. And so Velo can't even see what it's hitting now, and you just die. If you played Velo against Pteranodon, you realize you just die randomly, like you can't even see it. So there's that, and then the big, and pun intended here, other thing to mention is that Pteranodons after one patch suddenly start soloing apexes with ease. So that doesn't just happen. That's not just like all of the Pteranodon players got together in like a group meeting on Discord and decided, hey, we're going to change strategy and do this. No, that's not how that works. They didn't just start soloing apexes just randomly. Something happened, and that's reflective of broad imbalance and not just the machinations of a whining paramane. Thank you. Now, to the question of the herd, of course, all of these clips depict a single para against Pteranodons, so it begs the question, how does the herd situation work? From the Pteranodon's perspective, that basically boils down to,
look at all these dog shit Care Bear role-player herbivores that don't know how to play their dinosaur, killing each other with friendly fire.
Oh shit, we actually do that though. So, the most important thing is that the herd secure as much friendly fire damage as possible on the para, up to including knocking it off a ledge to incur fall damage, ensuring that 80% of the damage placed on the para originates from the herd itself, and with the Pteranodons only having to hit it about 3 or 4 times maximum in order to cause a body down on the para, causing an end of the engagement. Spiciness aside, you're probably a para player watching this if you've gotten this far into the video, so the reality is you know the danger that a herd presents to you as a para. You know what you can and can't get away with in a herd. Basically can't use your stomp at all in a herd engagement without killing something. Your options in relation to a herd are very limited, which is why, as you can see in the videos, I've kind of advocated or actually shown that I separate myself from the herd in these situations before I take the fight. And that way I can kind of minimize who's getting in my way, who's preventing me from attacking, and preventing myself from getting, whipped off a ledge by an appa or knocked off by a koa and things like that. So as far as serious, helpful things that a herd can be doing during an engagement is Oris and Packies can go to get healing flowers and crystals in order to prolong the engagement to help the para heal, to give it a stronger opportunity to kind of fight off the Pteranodons. Also, what Oris and Packies are able to do is once the para is able to hit one of the Pteranodons and it goes down to rest and heal while its allies continue the fight, the para can mark that damaged Pteranodon, and the Oris and the Packies can go ahead and harass it and kind of prevent it from sleeping. So that's helpful. Appas, if a para can situate itself near an appa, inside an appa, things like that, and the appa can protect it, and potentially whip damage will occur on the para, but it can situate itself in such a way that if the Pteranodon does go for the attack and does hit the para, it also may ensure a kill on the Pteranodon, so that's sometimes worth it. 2 high health allies interacting with each other is generally in the para's favor. Size are useful because of the spike shield, but beyond that it's difficult to really say anything useful that a herd can really do. Again, as a para player, it's a double-edged sword. Being in a herd, can't get away with much. Other paras, I've found it helpful to kind of line yourself up opposite directions, so tail to head, head to tail. That way you have more cover and you're able to attack from various directions at once when a Pteranodon goes ahead and dives you. That can be beneficial to you. And again, you both have high health pools, so if you do end up hitting each other a little bit, it's not the end of the world. But as far as other options a herd can do, honestly, just as much as possible, not hurt the para unnecessarily, even though that's going to happen. But it's not terribly ideal to stay in a herd to fight a Pteranodon, in my opinion. Typically, it ends the same way. Para is killed either by the herd or by the Pteranodon when that happens. So I think it's best to kind of separate yourself as long as you're in a situation where you are able to take the fight. In any case, that's going to be it for me. The goal of this video is to just put some ideas out there on how to respond to this situation with para versus Pteranodon. It's not a very organic situation. It shouldn't be what it is, and I don't think it'll be like this forever. But while it is, you know, you kind of have to respond to it, especially if you play on a server where there's not revives, where you're spending a lot of time growing a para, and you're dying to players who are having a full-grown dino, you know, within 2 hours. It's quite frustrating. Something to keep in mind is that these are contingencies. If the bird is big enough, if the bird is good enough, you're probably still going to die as the para. That's really the truth of it. While this situation is as it is, but employing these tactics, you know, adding them to your own, making it your own, really is what you should strive to do, I would think. Should help you kind of alleviate that a little bit while the situation remains. In any case, thank you so much for watching, especially if you got this far. Hope you enjoyed the video. Maybe more to come. This was pretty fun to make, so if there's a topic I care about relating to the game or something else, I might go ahead and make a video about it. In any case, have a good one. Bye-bye.